Sam into a more productive headspace. So I think this week, yeah, definitely Dean. And then we are on to the Bechdel test. This week was not a good week for the Bechdel test. So first, did we have two named women characters in this episode?
Are we counting Jess?
No.
Then no, I don't think so.
No, we just had Haley.
Who is a good character on her own, but she needs a friend.
Jess has already been essentially fridged, so...
Yeah, we're no longer counting her.
Yeah, she doesn't really count. She also wasn't really
Jess.
here. She was in a nightmare, so, like, she wasn't even really present.
I think we saw, like a hand. But
yeah, in her picture. We saw her picture. We didn't even really see her. So, yeah, just Haley. So, obviously, those two women couldn't talk to one another, and they couldn't have a conversation about something other than a man. So, that is a big old nope on the Bechdel test this week. That was a pretty hard fail. And then this week's case of the week was a Wendigo who comes from Indigenous culture. And Meredith, if you would like to start on this, since you did a lot of research, that is great.
Thank you. Okay, so I didn't get into as many sources as I wanted to, which is fine for now.
That's okay.
I found out the Wendigo is Algonquin, also associated with Chippewa, Odawa, and Potawatomi. I'm so sorry, guys. And I think Cree, as we mentioned. And they're humanoid. They eat humans. That's like their whole thing.
Yep.
And often they were once human and were turned into Wendigos as punishment for like cannibalism or gluttony or greed. Usually cannibalism, because as we said, that's their whole thing. So you get punished for your greed by being turned into a creature that has this insatiable appetite for human flesh.
Very fun.
It's pretty
Love
intense.
that.
One source described them as giants that were coated in ice. So two things here don't really match the Wendigo in this episode.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting that they're very associated with like cold and ice and stuff like that.
It would be great if this episode had taken place somewhere where it was cold, because after all, it is November.
You had the opportunity, guys. We could have had an ice monster.
Yeah, I think it would have been a lot easier for that. Also, then the fire would have made so much more sense.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. As for how to kill them, the sources I read mentioned that you had to kill the human at the heart of the Wendigo in order to kill the Wendigo.
Yes, I heard that as well.
Some sources said that it was like a Wendigo spirit that kind of possessed a human.
So, like, the human's still in there, deep down, somewhere.
Yeah. You can't save the human, but
you can kill it.
Kill the human, yeah. And they were saying that, like, its arrival is preceded by this, like, chill, has a heart made of ice. It's just very cold. You guys had such an interesting opportunity here.
Yeah, they really could have did something with the cold and chose not to.
Yeah. Anyway, and the Wendigos are, like, just pure evil.
Yeah, yep.
They eat people. They're terrible. They're gross. One thing I also wanted to say was the presence of the Wendigo raises an interesting question about how Aboriginal culture is portrayed on TV.
Yeah, I almost decided to get into this and decide not to, so if you got into this a bit, that would be great, because as I said, this show...
Well, I wanted to, but I ended up deciding that if we're going to have a discussion on cultural appropriation, it would be best to leave it for like an entire episode and maybe do more research and preparation, because it's a big topic.
Yeah, I think this is a good, like, starter episode for that. I think Bugs Season 1, Episode 8 is also maybe a better episode to have that discussion as well, if it's going to be in context of an episode. I have a little bit about, like, Wendigo as, like, a concept, as a story.
Okay.
So, obviously, it existed as a oral history for a long time among the Indigenous people who believed in the Wendigo for a long time, long before European people started showing up in North America. However, the first European written account of the Wendigo was by Paul Lejeune, who was a Jesuit missionary who lived among the Algonquin people in the early 17th century in what is now Quebec. That was in 1636, apparently.
It's a while ago.
Yeah, and then apparently in the 1800s, there was a lot of stories on the western frontier among the Plains Indigenous peoples and employees of the Hudson's Bay Company, and the term Wendigo found its way into Western medical vocabulary for a while by, like, early psychiatrists. It was used by J. Sandin in the 1920s, who, like, used it to, like, describe patients who had, like, a cannibalistic desires.
I think I remember encountering that, yeah.
Yeah, so we definitely have been, like, talking about this, like, since we showed up. European people showed up here and were like, what's this story about the cannibalistic monster? Huh. Tell us more about this, please.
Yeah, the cannibalistic aboriginal monster. It's very important to note that it's aboriginal. In a lot of other, like, European stories, the Wendigo has been used to demonize the people whose culture it's part of.
Yeah.
Not great, guys. What the hell?
Right. So now we're going to do a low light and a highlight. So your low light is the least favorite part of the episode, and your highlight is your favorite part of the episode. Would you like to go first, Meredith?
I need a moment to think.
Okay, that's okay. I can go first. So my low light is that I had never really thought much about the weather in Colorado because I've never been there before. But they really had the power to place this episode anywhere in the United States, anywhere in North America or South America where you can drive there from California. And then they screwed up these coordinates in the pilot and in this episode, and the weather is wacky. And like for the time period, they also could have made this take place at any time of year. Like they didn't say in the previous episode that it was November, and it would actually make more sense for it to be the spring. And it makes more sense to go camping in the spring than it does in the fall, or at least much sense.
Tommy, what is wrong with you?
Like overall, I think like there's no reason it had to be November. I mean, it did because they made Sam's birthday May 2nd, and then they made 6 months like November 2nd. But like they also could have just like they hadn't nailed any of those dates down before now.
That's true,
and they chose that. Also, they could have just moved this episode somewhere else that wasn't Colorado. And then my highlight is that Dean was in a more like Big Brother role this week. He had some great stuff to say. They established Sam having nightmares early in this episode, which is good for the coming episodes. And they started, like, we didn't see a lot of caretaker instincts in Dean in the first episode, which is a major aspect of his personality. And this week we saw a little bit more of that. So yeah, I guess that's my highlight, is that they've gotten a grasp on that aspect of Dean's character.
I think my low light would be killing the Wendigo, because as we mentioned, it was a bit lackluster. And my highlight would be the first few minutes of the episode, because it was a really good way to like introduce that this creature in the woods, and it's taking people, and it's just so fast, and it was a really, really creepy scene, and it was well done.
Yeah, it was scary. It was good. I agree with that 100%. So now we're going to do a quick mental health check. Again, I'm not a psychologist. This segment is based purely on my own opinions, and a weekly reminder that if you're struggling with anything at all, please reach out for help. Maybe not to me, though. I mean, you can if you really feel like you need to, but like, I'm not a professional, so I might not be that great at helping you, and I don't want to be responsible for that. But please reach out to someone who is a professional.
And the Winchesters continued to be an example of what not to do. So
yes.
Take that to heart.
Maybe don't go to them for advice either. Don't model their behavior when it comes to mental health. They could use some therapy.
Yeah.
This week was regarding mental health. Like, Sam's having some anger issues, but Sam's also grieving, and anger and bargaining is one of the 7 stages of grief. And it's only been a week since his girlfriend was just like brutally killed. So anger's not like an unreasonable response to have at this exact moment in time. Like, it's something I would keep an eye on, but I'm not that concerned about it.
Yeah, and I think it's also pretty in character for Sam as we get to know him into the show.
Honestly, I was more surprised by Dean's lack of anger in this episode and the way he actually talked to Sam than I was about the fact that Sam was angry.
I am glad that they are keeping Sam grieving, because I've noticed in a lot of shows they kind of like kill someone and then they grieve for like 1 or 2 episodes or even less, and then we just kind of forget that person ever existed.
Jess is one of the only characters that they consistently bring up.
Yeah.
As someone that they lost, which is like
they're doing that pretty well.
Especially in this first season. Like, Jess was very important to Sam. He hadn't really been in contact with his family for like 2 years, and like we assume that he had met Jess at some point in those last 2 years, and like they had been together while he was in love with her, and this was a tough loss for him for sure, and so it had a big impact on his life.
Yeah, like from a writing perspective, it really, really sucks that we had to fridge a woman again. 2 in 1 in the first episode. It's fine. Mom and girlfriend. But it was very, very important for Sam's backstory, because now he has, as we mentioned, this like personal reason to keep hunting.
I agree, especially because he didn't feel like personal connection to his mom's death. Like, he was too young for that to really, like, he was obviously impacted by being raised by his father, but he wasn't really impacted by losing his mother. He didn't know her to lose her.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he had every reason to leave, but he didn't have a reason to stay like Dean did.
Dean remembers their mom and is upset that he no longer has that in his life, whereas Sam just didn't remember. This was Sam's personal vendetta creating death.
Yes, exactly. And it's a lot more recent than Dean's, which is important to note.
So then the next thing we're keeping track of is soul transactions. not quite the time. Monsters only this week, so no soul transactions happening.
Yes.
And then to finish off this week's episode, we have a line of the week. So, Meredith, did you have a line of the week this week?
Saving people, hunting things, the family business.
And I had kind of guessed that that's what yours would be. Very iconic. I would have agreed with that, and I also had another one that I picked out just because I like to have one each. Or
Nice.
like a different one, or I try to pick a different one from what I think other people will pick. And mine is Sam saying, "It's a damn near perfect hunter. It's smarter than you, and it's going to hunt you down and eat you alive unless we get your stupid sorry ass out of here." Angry Sam.
That is great.
Angry, annoyed Sam. Annoyed that these people are not letting him just save their lives.
That is pretty annoying. Like, I'm trying to help you.
And that's it for this week. I've been KJ here with my guest Meredith, who is going to maybe give you some social media.
Oh, yeah, I have that. I'm Shades of Deianira at Tumblr and Instagram, and I have drawings, and I make weird stuff with my characters.
Yes, I will be posting those in the episode description as usual. I've been KJ. You can find me on all the social media platforms at Life Messes of KJ. If you want to be a guest on the podcast, you can contact me directly, or you can reach out through the podcast social media. You can find the podcast and email us at supernaturalopinionspodcast@gmail.com, at SVNOpinionspod on Twitter, Supernatural Opinions Podcast on Facebook, and at Supernatural Opinions Pod on Instagram, and Supernatural Opinions Podcast on Tumblr. And if you could subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to this podcast, that really helps people to find us. And if you want to hear more of me and my thoughts, you can check out my other podcast, Series of Opinions, available on all the same places as this one. Thank you again to Faith Ebert for our logo. This episode was written, produced, recorded, and edited by me. And special thanks to our guests,